Winter had settled heavy over the valley, not with gentle snow, but with cold mud, grey skies, and a silence that pressed against the chest. The road leading into Willow Creek was nothing more than a churned ribbon of brown sludge, wagon wheels having carved deep scars that filled with icy water. Horses moved slow here, hooves sucking at the ground with every step. At the edge of town stood a weather-worn homestead, its timber darkened by years of rain and hardship. Inside lived Thomas Hale, a widowed carpenter whose hands were rough, cracked, and forever smelling of pine sap and iron. Since his wife, Eleanor, had died 3 winters earlier, the house had known little warmth. Beyond the fire in the hearth and the laughter of his 6-year-old daughter, Clara. Clara was small for her age, with hair the color of wheat and eyes too observant for a child. She noticed things adults tried to ignore, the way grief bent her, father's shoulders, the way silence filled rooms like dust. Christmas was approaching, though it did not feel festive. There were no shop windows glowing, no polished streets, only a small church bell and the promise of prayer. Still, Clara believed in gifts, not the kind wrapped in paper, but the kind that healed broken places. That belief would lead her, boots soaked in mud, into a decision no child should have had to make. On the outskirts of Willow Creek, beyond the last crooked fence, stood an abandoned laundry shed near the frozen stream. That was where the townsfolk whispered a Chinese widow lived. Her name was Lin Xiaomei, though most people never bothered to learn it. She had arrived years earlier with her husband, a railroad laborer who never returned from the mountains after a blasting accident. With no family, no protection, and a foreign tongue that made her an easy target. Xiaomei survived by washing clothes, for those who would leave coins without looking her in the eye. She wore black year-round, not as a show, but because mourning had become her skin. Clara first saw her one afternoon while gathering fallen branches. The woman's hands were red and raw from icy water, her posture bowed not by age, but by loss. When Clara slipped and fell into the mud, it was Xiaomei who rushed forward, lifting the child as if she weighed nothing, wiping her face with the edge of her sleeve. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, a shared understanding of absence. Over the next weeks, Clara returned again and again, bringing crusts of bread, listening as Xiaomei spoke softly in broken English about mountains, paper lanterns, and a home that no longer existed. To Clara, she did not look strange or dangerous. She looked lonely, and loneliness, Clara believed, was something that could be fixed. On Christmas Eve, the sky hung low and white, threatening snow that never quite came. Thomas Hale sat by the fire, carving a small wooden horse for Clara, guilt heavy in his chest for not being able to offer more. The door creaked open, letting in a gust of cold air and mud. Clara stood there, cheeks flushed, eyes bright with purpose. Behind her, hesitant and pale, stood Lin Xiaomei, her black shawl damp at the hem, her hands folded tightly as if bracing for judgment. "Daddy," Clara said, her voice clear and proud, "I brought you a present for Christmas." She pointed at the woman. Time seemed to stop. Thomas rose slowly, every instinct sharpened by fear, confusion, and the weight of a town that judged quickly and forgave slowly. Xiaomei lowered her gaze, ready to be turned away like she always was. But Clara stepped forward, taking her father's hand. "She's alone," she said simply. "And you always say no one should eat Christmas supper alone." The fire crackled. Outside, the muddy road lay silent. In that moment, Thomas understood that this was not a gift. Wrapped in ribbon, it was a test of the man he still was beneath grief. He looked at Xiaomei again, truly looked, and for the first time since Eleanor's death, felt something shift, fragile and terrifying, like the first thaw after a brutal winter. The days following Christmas did not soften Willow Creek overnight, nor did they soften its people. Mud still clung to boots and hems, frost still crept through cracks in the walls, and suspicion lingered heavier than smoke in the air. Lin Xiaomei remained in the Hale house not as a guest, but as a quiet presence, moving carefully, as though every step required permission. She rose before dawn, tending the fire, mending torn sleeves, cooking simple meals with practiced restraint. Thomas Hale watched these things without comment, unsure whether he was witnessing kindness or obligation. The town noticed quickly. Whispers traveled faster than wagons on frozen ground. A Chinese widow under his roof. Some called it charity, others called it foolishness. Clara, untouched by such poison, flourished. She followed Xiaomei everywhere, learning words from another language, watching nimble fingers fold scraps of paper into birds and flowers. Laughter returned to the house in soft, surprising ways. Thomas felt it most at night, when the house no longer echoed, yet guilt tugged at him. Eleanor's memory hung like a faded photograph, still present, still powerful. One evening, as wind rattled the shutters, he finally spoke aloud, asking Xiaomei if she wished to leave once the snow came. She met his gaze, eyes steady but wet, and said she would go wherever she was not a burden. The word struck him harder than he expected. Burden. It was a word grief had taught him well. Spring did not arrive gently. It came with floods, swollen creeks, and roads so thick with mud that wagons sank to their axles. One afternoon, Thomas failed to return before nightfall. Clara waited by the window, fear tightening her chest. Xiaomei said nothing, only wrapped herself in a shawl and stepped into the storm. She found Thomas half a mile down the road, his horse trapped, its leg broken, his own body soaked and shaking. With no hesitation she worked, cutting reins, calming the animal, dragging Thomas inch by inch towards shelter. When help finally came, it was Xiaomei, who held him upright, her strength drawn from a place deeper than muscle. Word spread the next day, not as rumor but as fact. The widow had saved the carpenter. Eyes shifted, voices softened. A few even nodded in respect. During Thomas's recovery, it was Xiaomei who read to him by lamplight, her accent fading as comfort replaced effort. It was Clara who insisted they sit together at the table, her small hand joining theirs. Thomas began to see the truth he had avoided. Love did not erase the past. It honored it by continuing. Eleanor had been warmth. Xiaomei was resilience, different, not lesser. One night Thomas dreamed not of loss, but of a road finally drying beneath the sun. The following winter, the road into Willow Creek froze solid. No longer a pit of endless mud, but a firm, quiet path. The house stood stronger too, its roof repaired, its hearth never cold. In the small church, beneath bare rafters and flickering candles, Thomas Hale stood beside Lin Xiaomei, not as rescuer and rescued, but as equals. Clara sat in the front pew, feet swinging, face glowing with triumph she did not fully understand but felt deeply. There was no grand celebration, no music beyond a single hymn, yet something profound settled into place. The town watched, some with acceptance, others with regret for what they had once believed. Xiaomei no longer wore black every day, not because she forgot, but because she had learned remembrance could live alongside hope. On another Christmas morning, Clara ran through the house holding a simple paper lantern Xiaomei had made. "Daddy," she said, smiling just as she had the year before, "this one is for all of us." Thomas pulled them close, feeling a peace he had thought buried with Eleanor. Outside, the old road lay quiet, bearing no fresh scars. And in a world shaped by loss and endurance, a family born not of blood alone, but of mercy, stood rooted, unbroken and whole.